Yes, okay. Thank you for joining us this evening for this joint meeting of the Environmental and Planning and Land Use Committees on the proposed wildlife ordinance. I am Mindy Mann of the Environmental Committee from the Air-Beverly Crest Neighborhood Council, and I'm officially calling this meeting to order. This evening, our president, Travis Longcore, will be running the Zoom and facilitating the public comments for us. Before we move on to the agenda, let me read some procedural protocols for this evening so we all understand how this meeting will be run. In conformity with the September 16, 2021 enactment of California Assembly Bill 361, and due to concerns over COVID-19, the Air-Beverly Crest Neighborhood Council meeting will be conducted entirely with a call-in option or internet-based service option. Every person who wishes to address the board must dial in 669-900-6833 or 888-475-4499 and enter the webinar ID 815-5745-2805 and press pound to join the meeting, unless you've already joined via the Zoom link that you've been provided with. When prompted by the presiding officer, the public will be requested to dial *9 or use the raise hand function to address the board. Comments from the public on tonight's agenda item will be heard only when it is being considered. Comments from the public on other matters not appearing on the agenda that are within the board's jurisdiction will be heard during the general public comment period. Please note that under the Brown Act, the board is prevented from acting on a matter that you bring to its attention during the general public comment period. However, the issue raised by a member of the public may become the subject of a future board meeting. Public comment is limited to 1 minute per speaker, unless adjusted by the presiding officer of the board. If there are any broadcasting interruptions that prevent the public from observing or hearing the meeting will be recessed or adjourned. If members of the public are unable to provide public comment or be heard due to the issues within the neighborhood council's control, the meeting will be recessed or adjourned. Public comment is not required to be submitted in advance of the meeting. Any messaging or virtual background behind a board member is in the control of that member in their personal capacity and does not reflect any formal position of the Air-Beverly Crest Neighborhood Council or the City of Los Angeles. Thank you so much for listening to that. We're going to move on to the flag salute. I would like to introduce Robert Schlesinger, who is the chair of the Planning and Land Use Committee. He has a flag and will lead us in the national anthem. Robert Schlesinger, do you have the flag? Yes.
Pledge of Allegiance.
Let me wait.
Oh, not the national anthem. We're going to sing? Nope, sorry. I got carried away with the song. My mistake.
Here we go.
Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Now we're going to do the roll call. These are the committee members for both the planning and land use and ad hoc committees. Robert Schlesinger.
Here.
Robin Greenberg. Here. Don Lowe's. Guess he's absent. Sean Bayless.
Here.
Andre Stoica. I guess he's absent. Kathy Wayne.
Here.
Maureen Levinson.
Here.
Stella Gray. I guess she's absent. Stephanie Savage.
Here.
Nikki Miner.
I know she's coming in, but.
Okay, we'll see if she comes in later. Right now, she's absent.
Right.
Jamie Hall.
Here.
Jason Spradlin. Okay, absent. Yves Marzella. Okay, absent Wendy Morris. She told me she was not attending. Leslie Weisberg. Also not here. Travis Longcar, President.
Here.
And Mindy Rothstein Mann, I am here. And Asher Barondis. Also not here. Okay, I believe we have a quorum.
You do.
Okay, terrific.
Okay, first order of business is,
Approval of the agenda.
yeah.
Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Okay.
I moved.
Second.
Thank you, Kathy. And do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, Robert Schlesinger, second. Is there any discussion? Okay, it passes. We have the agenda, and now we're going to move on with the general public comment, and I'm going to pass this on to Robert Schlesinger.
Okay. The general public comments will be for 1 minute. If there's time, we may do more than that after the 1 minute, but we want to see how many people are going to be able to speak. I would suggest that you dwell on one subject for the minute with something that's bothering you or that you're concerned about.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Bob, but
yeah.
this is general public comment for items not on the agenda. Yeah, okay. It's okay.
I've been at this too long, Travis.
Yep.
Right. Well, as far as the general public comment is concerned, there are no items agendized except for this one item. So there's no general public comment unless somebody wants to bring something up outside of the agenda this evening.
Thank you. So there is one hand raised.
Okay.
So this would be general public comment on things not on the agenda. I have Richard M. With a hand raised, and you can put it down if this is on the topic for tonight, which is the wildlife ordinance. If not, okay. And the hand went down. Very good. So anyone who's on the line who wants to speak on something not on the agenda, go ahead. I see Joanne D'Antonio. You have a minute. You can unmute yourself and go ahead. Joanne?
I'm actually for the agenda item.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone for general public comment? Okay. Seeing no hands raised, Mr. Schlesinger, go ahead.
Okay. Next thing we're going to do is have an opening presentation by Jamie Hall, who is Vice President and Chair of Governmental Affairs. And he's going to make a presentation on the wildlife ordinance. Jamie?
Hello, everybody. Let me share my screen here. A second here. Okay, now let me get this into the presentation mode. Let's see here, slideshow, play from start. All right, can everyone see? Travis, can you see my screen? Okay, yeah. Great. So I just want to first start off by introducing myself yet again. My name is Jamie Hall. I'm the Vice President of Legislative Affairs. And the goal of this presentation is literally just to give you some of the high points of the ordinance. It's not possible for us to, in the limited time that we have here tonight, to really go over every single aspect of the ordinance. And staff, the Department of City Planning has put on several presentations which are online. And so we would refer you to those presentations which supplement which we're providing here. This presentation really was just to provide some general framework so that we can engage in an informed discussion tonight. It's not intended to go over every single nuance and detail. And also, In presenting this, I'm trying to be super factual and neutral, and I'm not trying to indicate what my personal preference or position is with regard to any aspect of the ordinance. Okay, and so proposed wildlife ordinance, a summary of the ordinance. So what are we going to talk about tonight? First, I want to discuss why the ordinance was proposed, just kind of a background in terms of the legislative intent. What are the boundaries of the proposed ordinance? What are the key components of the ordinance? And then we're going to have some public comment after this presentation is over with. And then there's going to be a discussion by the joint committees. And then we are going to draft a letter to the city outlining what our position is with regard to the draft ordinance. So that's just sort of an overall framework in terms of this presentation, what we discussed during this presentation, the role of public comments, and then also what we expect to do when this is all over with. So this is the original motion that started the whole effort. You see that on the left-hand side of the screen. It was filed in April of 2014. It was presented by Councilman Koretz and seconded by 4 other council members. This requested that the city attorney, in consultation with other agencies and environmental organizations, to prepare an ordinance to create a wildlife corridor in the eastern area of the Santa Monica Mountains. The Department of City Planning has created this draft ordinance with a set of land use regulations that would maintain wildlife connectivity in the city. And that's actually what we're here to discuss tonight, the 35-page draft ordinance. What are the boundaries? So you can see here, these are the boundaries of what the city's calling the pilot study area. It contains the entirety of the Bel Air Beverly Crest Neighborhood Council area, which stretches from the 405 down to Sunset to Laurel Canyon Boulevard and then up to Mulholland. It goes beyond that, actually. It stretches to across Mulholland and almost to, it actually does touch Ventura Boulevard in Studio City. And then it crosses Laurel Canyon and goes eastward all the way to the 101. So right there, you see the pilot study area. And this is the first area in the city where the wildlife ordinance would apply, and it includes the eastern Santa Monica Mountains. The draft ordinance was released in May of 2021. The city's currently accepting public comment. And that's why we're all here tonight, is to receive the public's comment so that these 2 committees can formulate what our comment should be on the draft ordinance. The Department of City Planning put together an informational video, which was released in May of 2021. An online workshop was conducted in June of 2021. A frequently asked questions brochure has been prepared. And all of those things, I highly encourage you to go look at. There's a dedicated website on the Department of City Planning where you can access all of these documents. The other thing I want to point out is the definitions are super important in the ordinance. You can't really understand the ordinance without understanding the definitions. And those start at section E of the ordinance. Other big, important, formative question is, who does the ordinance apply to? So the applicability provision, which is on page 1, is super important. It says the provisions of this section apply to any project that involves grading, construction, erection of, or addition to, or structural alteration of any building or structure which requires the issuance of any demolition permit, building permit, fencing, foundation permit, or grading permit. Now, this is an important sentence. Projects that only involve interior construction and additions that do not exceed 500 square feet are not subject to the provisions of this section, except within a resource buffer. Within a resource buffer, no permit shall be issued for grading, construction, erection of, or addition to, or structural alteration of any building or structure. So if I can summarize this, if you are building a new house within the pilot study area, you are subject to this ordinance. However, if you're only doing interior construction and you're not encroaching into a resource area, you're not subject to this ordinance. If you're doing an addition that does not exceed 500 square feet, you're not subject to this ordinance unless you're encroaching into a resource buffer. Where did that 500 square feet rule come from? I don't know, but that tends to be the city's general rule when it comes to triggering all sorts of regulations. Say, for example, you wanted to build a house or do a remodel of a house that was on a substandard hillside limited street. You wouldn't be subject to the amended BHO unless your remodel was over 500 square feet. I don't know where the 500 square feet comes from, but it seems to be the city's magic number. So the first thing I want to talk about is setbacks. The draft ordinance has a variety of setbacks, and the ordinance actually, okay, in each section of the ordinance, there is an intent section, which sort of explains what the alleged intent is for each of the set of regulations. So you can see here the intent provisions for the setbacks. There are minimum front or rear yard setbacks outlined in the ordinance, basically no less than 10 feet on either side. And there are minimum side yard setbacks, and that's no less than 5 feet. There's also cumulative front yard and rear yard setback options and cumulative side yard setback options. Those are too complicated to explain in this presentation. Just know that they exist. The ordinance also has a maximum impermeability coverage requirement, and that's based on your lot size. The goal here is not to put hardscape over your entire lot, because that comes with an environmental cost. And it's important to understand what impermeable means. And impermeable is, and this is one of those definitions that I say are so important to look at in the ordinance. It's a material that is not considered permeable and which does not permit water penetration to a soil depth of 18 inches or more. So you can see here in this table here, the percentage of your lot that can contain impermeable coverage. And it basically, it deviates based on your lot size. Okay, the next big topic I'm going to talk about is the fences, walls, and hedges requirement. Again, these are the intent provisions in the ordinance that explains why these things are, why staff believes that they're related to the purpose of wildlife protection. Let's see here. So fencing location, this is kind of a big part of the ordinance. Basically for perimeter fences, walls, or privacy screens, they must be wildlife friendly. And I'm going to explain in the next slide what that means. So you can still have these, a perimeter fence, a wall, or a privacy screen, but it just must be wildlife friendly. However, if you don't want to do that, you can install a non-wildlife friendly fencing, but it must be located outside of the setback or the resource buffer. And if you look on the right-hand side, you can see an example of that. This is an example of someone who doesn't want to put a wildlife friendly fence up. So the orange there would be a solid wooden fence. You can still put that up, but it has to be outside of the setback. So basically, yeah, so that's an example of that. For public facility, open space, utility, open space easements, we do have lots in the pilot study area that are zoned this. All of those fences must be wildlife friendly. And for vacant lots, to the extent that vacant lots even have fences, they have to be wildlife friendly. Wildlife friendly fencing is limited in height and must maintain minimum clearage above the ground and have an overall opacity not greater than 50%. The ordinance also outlines material requirements. All fencing shall be constructed with materials that are not harmful to wildlife. They must be constructed of non-combustible materials, and prohibited materials include spikes, glass, or razor wire. And there's even some regulations for hedges. Hedges must maintain openings or spacing at the ground level. I said we were going to discuss what wildlife friendly fencing is. So wildlife friendly fencing is fencing which supports habitat connectivity and wildlife movement through appropriate location, extent, and design. The ordinance sets out dimensional standards and an opacity requirement. Non-combustible materials are encouraged, but are not required. And so you'll see the dimensional standards, there's a table there that sets out the maximum height, which varies based on whether or not you're in the front setback or the side rear setback. And then there's some examples of wildlife friendly fencing. It could be like a split rail or flat board or wrought iron. You see these in, like, if you've ever been to Rancho Palos Verdes or some other kind of more rural communities, you see a lot of these types of fences. And we actually, yeah, so that's that. Let's see here. Okay, wildlife fence opacity or opacity. I'm not even sure exactly how to say that. Opacity is measured as a percentage calculated by dividing the solid portion of the object area by the total area of the object. The total area of the object is measured as the smallest regular shape containing all elements of the object or assembly. So there is an actual definition for this, but the big takeaway should be that you're looking for fences that have some gaps in them so that animals can pass through. Okay. Okay, the next big thing I want to talk about is the grading limitations that are set out in the ordinance. This is a highly technical, some of these are very technical, and I'm not going to be able to explain tonight, but I'm just going to go over some of them. Slopes in excess of 100%. No grading or structure shall be developed on natural slopes in excess of 100% and greater. There are limitations. The BHO actually has grading exemptions, and this ordinance would remove certain grading exemptions for driveways and to cut underneath footprints of proposed new homes. And it also makes changes to remedial grading over 1,000 cubic yards. It also says, importantly, remedial grading that would result in substantial landform alterations shall not be permitted where project alternatives, including but not limited to deepened foundations, caissons, soldier piles, could be utilized to provide equivalent geological stability. And then finally, there's a site plan review requirement for new homes that are more than 10,000 square feet. So like really large houses have to go through a site plan requirement. So those are the new grading limitations outlined in the ordinance. The ordinance also mandates buffers from certain natural resources. You see here a ridge line that's currently under construction, and that's an example of a buffer zone. That I say resource buffer, that's a defined term in the ordinance. I said at the very beginning, it's important to understand defined terms. That's in the ordinance itself. But there is a mandated buffer between lakes, reservoirs, ponds, rivers, streams, creeks, riparian areas, wetlands, open channel, catch basins, public easements, ridge lines, and open space. And notice how the buffer zone is different depending on the resource. So, you know, sometimes it's 50 feet, sometimes it's 15 feet. Okay, vegetation and landscaping. There is a requirement in the ordinance that for new construction, 1 tree must be planted on site for every 1,000 square feet of new floor area, with a minimum of 1 native tree required. The ordinance also adds to the protected tree ordinance, and it protects, or actually I should say it requires that significant trees, which are trees of a certain size, regardless of species, it requires that they be replaced at a 2-to-1 ratio. Right now, if someone wanted to cut down a pine tree, they don't have to replace it at a 2-to-1 ratio because it's not a protected tree. This ordinance would require significant trees to be replaced at a 2-to-1 ratio. It doesn't allow for drip line interference. There's a requirement that dead and/or fallen trees be replaced per the significant tree replacement ratios. And it also says that the dead or fallen tree material should be retained on site as mulch, compost, or soil amendment, unless the LAFD is requiring removal as a result of brush clearance. Let's see here. The ordinance also sets out a minimum undisturbed or plant coverage area. Let's see, I might have that on the next one. Do I? No, I do not. So basically, based on your lot size, like, for example, the permeable area, there is a requirement that you leave a certain amount of the lot undisturbed in its natural state, and that either goes up or down depending on the size of your lot. There's also a prohibition of planting species that are identified on a prohibited plant list, basically invasive species. And there is a requirement for wildlife friendly and fire-wise landscaping requirements. And you can see here, this is from something that Department of City Planning published. They've created 3 different zones here: planting zone A, B, and C. Planting zone A is that area that's closest to the house, and you're required to put 50% native species there. For B and C, you have to put a minimum of 75% native species. And then zone C should blend with the existing natural vegetation and be managed in accordance with LAFD standards to facilitate firefighting. So basically, as the further you get from your house, the more natural it's supposed to be. There's also a requirement in the ordinance for lighting windows and trash enclosures. There is certain outdoor lighting is prohibited. There's a maximum height for certain lighting fixtures. And there's a requirement for bird-safe facade, bird-safe glass, basically. And there's new rules for trash and waste enclosures to prevent unexpected encounters with wildlife. One of the big questions for me was how the ordinance was going to be enforced. And so the ordinance does say this: for any project within the Wildlife Ordinance District, the Department of Building and Safety shall not issue any permits, including but not limited to grading, shoring, or building, unless an administrative clearance, administrative review, or other relief has been obtained pursuant to the applicable procedures in Section J. So remember, this ordinance is designed to really capture people who are either building a new home or doing a major remodel. And so you would have to get an administrative clearance or an administrative review before your building permits would be issued. Now, exactly how all the details of that works, who issues the administrative clearance, I don't know, but this is what the ordinance says currently. And one other question is, what if you can't comply with the ordinance? What if, say, for example, something that you wanted to do encroached into that resource buffer zone area? What's your remedy? So the ordinance says that a deviation from any setback, impermeable hillside coverage, landscaping, and vegetation and or grading standards may be allowed as a zoning administrator's approval. Deviation from any resource buffer, slope, and or floor area standards may be allowed as a variance. So you can either get a ZA approval for certain types of deviations or a variance for other types of deviations. And it says there's an alternative compliance provision in the event that requirements for fencing, lighting, windows, and or trash enclosure cannot be met. As relief, the applicant may, upon approval by the Director of Planning, provide alternative fencing, lighting, windows, trash enclosure designs that meet or exceed the intent and guidelines of the wildlife fencing, lighting, windows, or trash enclosure standards. So for some of those other regulatory measures, there is a procedure that's less onerous than a ZA or variance approval. You can get approval from the Director of Planning. So that's the end of my slideshow. Again, there's a lot to unpack here. And I hope that everybody in advance of tonight's meeting had the opportunity to review the ordinance in detail. And I hope this is helpful for a fruitful discussion tonight.
Okay. Following Jamie's presentation, which we've just heard, this evening's comments by the public are going to be fact-finding. We need to find out what they're concerned about. We need to evaluate that. The committee will then discuss the ordinance and provide comments that will eventually be incorporated into a letter to the Department of City Planning. This most likely will take place with another PLU environmental meeting, then a planning and land use meeting, and eventually a meeting to the full board to write a letter to the Department of City Planning. So all we would like to hear this evening is, what are the problems? We are going to take notes, all right? And then we'll discuss it at the next meeting, what the resolution can be or what's being done about it. Who's calling the?
So I can take the public comment if you'd like, Mr. Chair. All right. So everyone who's online who would like to speak, go ahead and raise your hand now. Or if you're on the phone, it would be *9.
Right.
And I will call on everybody in order that they show up here. And so at the moment we have 14 hands up. And just so we get a sense about, but we have 60 attendees. And so if please do raise your hand now if you intend to speak, so we can sort of judge how many, how long we should let things go in terms of timing so that everyone has time to speak. 21, 23, so it's *9. If you, it also gets you a spot in line here. *9 on the phone, or the raise hand function on Zoom, which is on the bottom there, and with which we've all become painfully aware. So we have 25 hands up. Mr. Chair, how much time should we allot for each speaker?
We're going to try 1 minute.
Okay,
and see
great.
how that
Okay,
goes.
so we'll start with Joanne.
My suggestion is that you've got to pick on one subject because somebody else will pick on another subject.
Okay.
If you put in multiple subjects, you're not going to get that accomplished in that period of time.
So we'll I'm going to read the first three names. It'll be Joanne D'Antonio, David Caden, and Richard M. So Joanne D'Antonio, you can unmute. We'll take your comment.
I'm Joanne D'Antonio. I'm chair of the Neighborhood Council Sustainability Alliance Trees Committee, and I'm speaking separately from this role. I am speaking to support the Wildlife Corridor Ordinance. Living in the hills should be just that. Let's not turn the hills into a concrete city contributing to heat island effect and take away all the woodland areas and wildlife habitat that actually contribute to the health of the human inhabitants of the city. This is a long-awaited curbing of a disturbing trend that I have been watching over the past 35 years. Thank you.
Thank you. David Scott Caden, go ahead and unmute. Mr. Caden?
He's still muted.
Mr. Caden, if you can
David,
hear us.
can you hear us?
All right, so we're going to put you on ice here for a minute. Next speaker will be Richard M. and then Bill Grunfest. Richard M., if you can unmute now.
Is that better?
Is that Mr. Caden?
Yes, it is.
Okay, Richard M., hold on. We'll take Mr. Caden first. Go
Thank you.
ahead.
Appreciate it. So three things. In general, the board of the Benedict Canyon Association, of which I'm the president, supports wildlife, etc. But number one, what if members of the association ask, what does this really mean to us? As Jamie very professionally indicated, there's a lot of different issues regarding it, and how do the board members explain to members, what does that impact us who are not rebuilding, not building a new home, not remodeling, but what does it do with the fencing, lighting, etc.? Number two, what relation does this have with the ridgeline ordinance, if any, the requirements of the ridgeline ordinance? And number three, things such as the bird safety and lighting, etc., does that apply only or mainly to new construction or existing? Thank you. And the main thing is, what do we tell our constituents what the summary of all this is without getting into the weeds that Jamie so artfully discussed and is kind of complicated. Thank you.
Thank you. Next comment will come from Richard M. Go ahead and unmute, and we'll take your comment now.
Okay, this is Richard McCracken. Guess it's showing up as Richard M. Apologize for that. So I live on Upper Linda Flora. Our street is on a ridge line. So most of the houses on this street are within the buffer zone that's created around this ridge line. In my case, my modest 2,000 square foot house that's been here for 60 years it actually has the ridge line touch and come across the property. So I effectively, 50 feet of my house will be in this buffer zone, meaning that if it's, burns down or is damaged, I can't replace it. I can't even, quote, disturb the soil within this buffer zone, which is basically my front yard. Many of the houses here, which are modest houses on Upper Linda Flora, are going to be facing that same problem. So that is just one issue that I would focus on. There are others, for example, the need to move all my trash cans into the garage. And I think that there are a lot of surprising results like this that come out of this language. And I got to say that there are a lot of ambiguities in this proposed statute, that were not really raised in the summary that I just heard. And I would love to point them out to anybody if I get an opportunity to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Bill Grunfest.
Yes, I'm also on Linda Flora.
Boston.
I'm sorry about that, Bill. We lost you for a second. Can you start over? Bill?
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you. So sorry about that. Go ahead.
Not at all. I'm strongly opposed to this ordinance. I'm on Linda Flora in a 2,500 square foot home that's been here since the 60s. Home invasions and crimes are way up. The fencing regulations and corridors it creates will be used by criminals to burglarize homes, and it will result in people getting killed, as Miss Event was tragically killed by a burglar last week. It reduces our usable square footage. It prevents our building and rebuilding homes in the event of damage or wildfire. It'll destroy property values because of that and sales of our homes. Minor issue, the trash enclosures and bird treatments are alleged solutions for non-existing problems. I'm not going to comply with these regulations if I feel they endanger my family's safety, and I will organize the entire neighborhood to en masse refuse compliance and to engage a pro bono law firm to sue the relevant authorities.
Are you done?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Griffiths. Next we have Daniel Friedman and then Allison McCracken. Daniel Friedman, go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, everyone on the Neighbor Council. I'm sorry, good evening. Pardon me. I'm looking forward to the morning. Daniel Friedman, I'm with Jeffrey Mingles, Butler and Mitchell, the law offices of JMBM. We represent several property owners and homeowners and developers who do a lot of work and who live and reside in the hills. You know, our primary concern, we think there's a lot of issues in the wildlife ordinance that we have issues for on behalf of our clients. But yeah, I think the primary one is we believe there needs to be some environmental review done here. And I think that's why you're going to get a lot of strong reactions from people about the ordinance. The issue is, this is really a development, a baseline hillside ordinance type of issue. And there's no environmental studies. It makes no connection to the actual wildlife benefits. This is being processed with the categorical exemption. It's not being processed like a development project would or some other zoning ordinance would with an environmental review. So our kind of basic suggestion, and I think it would help inform constituents who are opposed, would be that there be some environmental review be done as part of this so that the public can be informed about the actual benefits to wildlife that will occur as a result of these proposed changes. So that's our primary comment, is that we think there's just a lack of information about, what are the actual benefits to wildlife if this ordinance moves forward. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Next speaker will be Allison McCracken.
Hi there. Thank you for the presentation and holding the meeting. I have 3 comments for the group to suggest to the city planning office. Number 1 would be to notify all homeowners via an official letter of what's happening. There's been no notice to the homeowners in an official capacity, like a tax bill that's sent out. All those homes that are in the area should be notified, and I'd request that be done through the city planner. I'm happy to pay for it, but I think an official letter needs to go out to the homeowners, each individual homeowner. Number 2, we need an updated resource buffer map. We have no way to know whose home is being in a resource. There is just a very generic, high-level, blurry map that they have produced, and so it's very tricky to discuss something that we have no idea how it actually affects us, as well as there's a very open-ended comment in the ordinance about what is a resource, and they can add as many resources as they want whenever they want, and they don't describe a process on how it's added. And number 2, I'd ask for supporting documents, as Daniel just mentioned. There are a lot of great intentions, but no proof of actually why they've been put together, and some of those suggestions aren't very valuable to wildlife. Some of the fencing they suggest actually could harm wildlife. So I just would love a little bit more proof how this will benefit wildlife before we actually, move forward with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Pat and Jay. It's showing up as.
Need some help? You don't?
Yep, go ahead.
Can I help you?
Pat and Jay.
Hi. I live in Upper Bel Air Road, and all of our houses are non-conforming according to this. I was a successful professional, but I will not be able to build my 4,500 1957 house if I have a fire or some other kind of damage. And that bothers me. We're all within too close to the street, and we have a steep hillside. Given your square footage requirement, hillside not counting for square footage, I doubt that I'll be able to build my house again. And I'm very distressed by that my ability, this was a huge investment for me, and my ability to rebuild is going to be gone if something happens like a wildfire. And I honestly do not think that's fair. And especially when I know that the inspectors go to Hawaii on vacation by homeowners and developments. And it's whoever's got the most money speaks. And there's talk about a hotel development on a hillside east of us with 26 rooms. And that will probably go through. Meanwhile, older time homeowners will never be able to build again. My property will be worthless. I have non-conforming property if this ordinance goes through. And I think it's actually really unconscionable. And the only reason I got informed was because Chuck sent it out to us to even let us know. There's no news about it. Koretz is saying to UCLA at a webinar that that the Bel Air Association is totally behind it. I saw Scott Bayless there. I'd like to know from him if he's totally behind it, knowing that many, many houses will never be able to be built again.
Can you wrap up, please?
Even with their square footage, if we have a fire. So basically my property is worthless.
Thank you. Next we have Joanne Deutsch. If you can unmute and go ahead, Joanne Deutsch. Okay, next after that we have...
I'm unmuted.
Okay, there we go.
I've taken some pictures of some collections of trash cans of people in Laurel Canyon who just put them out by the not on the street, adjacent to the street, and leave it there 365. So I'd like to know where I can send those pictures so that you can have it for part of the package to see what the problem is. And the area is across the street from the Nancy Pool Overlook. And then I also wanted to point out that there's a lot of facilities and homes and businesses that are totally not in compliance with what's around, what the regulations are currently. And I can't imagine the value of putting in new regulations if you don't also put in sanctions that really kick people around for failure to comply, because people don't do that. I have a neighbor who just purloined 10 feet of Mulholland, which is open space, and nobody said anything, nobody's done anything, and nobody cares. And if you look at the summit over on Coldwater Canyon, they have razor wire up there and nobody cares. The city, the city council people don't care. How do you get enforcement? So my bottom line is you have to have very serious enforcement and requiring people to make the decision that this is just too expensive to ignore. And it might be just in, as you've done with some of the other properties, you have a sanction where if you're in non-compliance, you have X number of months or years where you can't build, is in addition to financial compensation.
Thank you. Next comment will come from Mohammed Guivachian.
Yes. Good evening. I have a property on Linda Flora also, and I have several items that I want to bring it up. One is this ridgeline ordinance. There is already a more detailed, more studied thing going on with the ridgeline ordinance. There is no reason, absolutely no reason, to bring that into and combine it with this wildlife. I think that should be completely removed from this, because it's going to be affecting everybody, and all these people are talking their life savings are in danger. So that's number one. Number two, setback requirements, front setback requirements. It has nothing to do with wildlife saving. There are other rules and ordinances that covers front setbacks, and I could understand about side setbacks. Some issues could be done, but front setback issue is totally irrelevant here. Now, about the side setback, if there is, let's say, the whole purpose of us providing a passage to an animal, it could have easily requested like 2 feet, non-obstructed passage allowed, for example, in the side setback. So if you have a 10-foot, or because of height, it becomes sometimes 11 or 12 feet, yes, we can provide couple feet, something like that for an animal to pass. But expecting all of that side setback to be blocked and provided for an animal that once in a while might or might not pass through there, that it's too much. And as other people just brought up, it will create some safety issues. The measurement,
wrap up, please?
Yes, the measurement of setback is wrong, because if you have a curved street and you connect from one end of the side setback to the other setback and say this is the line, and now you have to go beyond this line, this is complicated. Maybe other people don't understand, but you guys should know what I'm talking about. It is very wrong, because in that case, suddenly, because of this straight line you just created by one not well thought definition, you are going to be asking a building to be set way back, and because of either upslope or downslope, this would actually prevent people from building. So I think this ordinance has a great name. It could have easily modified.
Could you wrap this up, please?
Yes, but I am against because it's not well thought.
Thank you.
And by the way, it's not also people are not aware of it. I just found out.
Okay, thank you.
I think there should be more note.
Thank you. Next we'll hear Charles Miller. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm here on behalf of LA Native, which is a group of native plant advocates in Los Angeles, a combination of environmental groups and neighborhood councils. I want to speak in favor and encourage the council to support the ordinance with respect to the native tree and native plant requirements, which actually we think don't quite go far enough, because we think all landscaping should be native unless it's providing food for people. We've lost 90% of our butterflies and songbirds in Los Angeles in the last century, and that's almost been exclusively driven by replacing our natural plant habitat with exotic European, Asian, and Australian landscaping that has no business being here. There are over 6,000 native plants that are part of the California ecosystem that cover every possible landscaping need, and many beautiful trees, many beautiful flowers that cover everything that anyone could need. And so we strongly encourage you to support the native plant requirements and native tree requirements in the ordinance. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Dan Blumstein. Dan, go ahead.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak. I'm a UCLA professor and I'm a biodiversity scientist who recently moved to the Beverly Glen and Mulholland area. I think there's a lot to like in this proposed ordinance because I fully support land preservation in the Santa Monica Mountains. I want to limit development in the area, and I support wildlife-friendly actions so as to ensure connectivity around the valley. But as a recent homeowner, as has been noted, of a modest 1,900 square foot 1959 home, I'm very concerned about the specifics of this proposal. The devil's in the details, and the more I look at this and the more I learn about zoning and regulations, I realize that the details are really punitive. I'm concerned because ours, like other speakers' homes, are on small buildable pads on a ridge line. And when, not should, but when there's a catastrophic earthquake or fire, it would be essentially impossible to rebuild. So the value of our major investment will be degraded without compensation. Grandfathering in the ability to rebuild with the same footprint would be a concrete improvement. But triggering the ordinance with as little as 500 square foot modification seems excessive. It's much more wildlife friendly and sustainable to modify existing homes than to build new ones. We're in the Mulholland corridor. We can't build up. We don't have no intention of changing anything outside. But as written, there's a lot of details that seem pretty nasty here in what is intended to be a good ordinance to maintain connectivity at the large scale in the valley. And I support that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Blumstein. Next, we have Diana Nicole.
Hi, thanks, Travis. I'm with Sunshine Hill Residents Association. We think this is absolutely an ordinance, and we support it. We feel everyone should want to support it. These wildlife corridors, by the way, are not unique. They exist in other cities. We understand that corridors for wildlife is something, or is a different concept of space that developers and real estate agents and a lot of people are used to, but actions like securing your garbage bins, landscaping with our beautiful natives, wildlife friendly fences, sharing some of our setbacks or a slice of our lots so wildlife isn't cut off from life support is really not a hardship, especially for people who are building in the hills. We're inclined to think that people obstructing this ordinance think nature only resides in the remote wilderness somewhere out there, but that's not true. We live in a rare biodiversity hotspot that's threatened by what we do in our yards, which also means nature is in our backyards. So not doing this ordinance means we are participants to its destruction. We think this ordinance is long overdue, and we urge you to write a letter or a CIS in support of it. Lastly, I'd like to say I urge you not to take biological advice on fencing for wildlife from a real estate agent. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have, it comes up as Sierra Club Angeles Chapter. So go ahead. Sierra Club. And following will be Isabelle De Vivier and then Patricia Templeton, Sierra Club Angeles Chapter.
Okay, hi. I tried to change that. My name is Terry Brady. I volunteer with the Sierra Club sometimes, but I'm not representing the Sierra Club tonight. And I had their Zoom on my phone for another event, and that's why it comes up that I did change my name to Terry Brady, but I don't know why it's still showing that. I do support this ordinance. I feel it's very important to allow wildlife connectivity, and and the 5-foot setback is the minimum that's necessary. Even those 5-foot walkways probably aren't enough for many situations, but it is a minimum that would prevent the blockage of wildlife corridors. As Paul Edelman has stated in a letter I saw from him from the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, even one fence can block off wildlife connectivity for the puma, for deer, and it can isolate a species and prevent it from having, what do you call it? You know, when wildlife is isolated and it doesn't have biological integrity anymore because it's interbreeding too much. So that the importance of these wildlife connectivity can't be overstated. So I hope that you'll support it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Isabelle De Vivier.
Hi, my name is Isabelle De Vivier. I'm an architect. I've designed several homes in the Mulholland corridor. I completely support this ordinance. The individual components of the ordinance are not at all difficult, onerous, or illogical. My only criticism is that the ordinance doesn't include more area of the Los Angeles mountains. I grew up in the Hollywood Hills, and over the course of my youth, I saw how the creek below my house disappeared and how the coyote and the deer also disappeared as larger homes were built uphill from our house. We live in a biodiversity hotspot, and the reason we came to the Hollywood Hills was because it was beautiful and it was natural and it was wild. And I think this ordinance does a terrific job at trying to recreate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Patricia Templeton. Go ahead, unmute.
Hi. This is a very complicated ordinance, and there's a lot of interplay between this ordinance and other ordinances. And my concern is, and I'm an attorney, and I've spent hours, tens of hours, going over this ordinance and trying to put it in a form that people could understand. My concern is that most people, and I suspect a lot of people on the committee, and I know some of them have admitted this, don't understand what's in the ordinance and don't understand the consequences. And I have watched the presentations from the planning department, and they have been disingenuous. Even a lot of the artwork that goes along with it is deceptive. I support the intent behind a lot of this. I just feel that the ordinance is overreach. It goes too far. A lot of it would be ineffective, if not dangerous, and that there's better ways to accomplish some of these lofty goals than what's set out in the ordinance. My concern is getting accurate information to the people who would be most effective. I know when they were drafting this ordinance, they reached out to a lot of environmental groups. There was no outreach to the ordinary homeowner. Every single home in this pilot area will be affected, many severely, especially people with older homes. This ordinance penalizes people with older, smaller homes.
Can you wrap up, please?
Yeah, a lot more research needs to be done and a lot more outreach needs to be done on this ordinance.
Thank you. Next we have Shelley. Shelley?
Yes, thank you, Travis. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
My name is Shelley Billick, and I'm the chair of the CFAC Community Forest Advisory Committee, but I'm speaking as a hillside resident. I've lived in the hillsides for probably the last 18 years. And the reason I moved to the hillsides is to enjoy the nature, the peace, the birds, the wildlife. And I have too seen it disappear due to more fencing, larger developments, original homes being razed to the ground to build McMansions. And I think we have to remember that we are guests on that land. We don't own nature. And nature should be revered for its beauty, for its inspiration, for all the things that we get from nature. All of our food, the air we breathe, our water come from nature. So in my opinion, the reason we've come to this position where we need such an ordinance is because we have destroyed so many of the natural habitats that we live in. And I think it's rather ironic to hear from the developers and attorneys on this call saying that there should be more environmental review or that there should be more science proving why there's a benefit to wildlife. I've seen many, many projects in the hillsides that do exactly the opposite. So I heartily support this ordinance, and I hope that this committee will write a strong letter to that effect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Robert Mann. Robert Mann, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I would just say that property rights are entitled to consideration, of course, but they must be balanced with the need to create real protections for wildlife and the preservation of the Santa Monica Mountains as a whole. I believe this ordinance strikes the right balance. I think this council should support it. Lastly, in terms of process and the discussion in the community, I think we should be honest about something. Some of these objections are nothing more than scare tactics. I believe that they're not helpful to a rational discussion of the merits of this ordinance. And I would urge those involved in this process to try to concentrate on the greater good and to have a more rational and calm discussion about these issues.
Thank you. Next, we have Joan Rimone.
Hi, I'm Joan Rimone, and I have lived in my house on Lower Bellagio since 1968. And I am confused and tormented by this ordinance. I don't have any hills on either side of me. I'm on a flat level area My back fence is about 10 feet from Sepulveda Boulevard. And then I have the freeway. And across the street, there's houses and then a hillside. So am I involved in this or not?
Joan, we can't answer that here, but it is a question. I'm writing all the questions and all the information, and I will certainly bring this up at the next meeting, which I'll talk about after this review is over.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Don Hardison. Don Hardison, go ahead. Don Hardison, going 3 times. Okay, Carrie Jensen, if you're able to unmute and speak. Carrie Jensen.
Yeah, this is Carrie Jensen and David Nealon. We're both homeowners in the Beverly Glen area. I'm actually also an environmental scientist in an environmental discipline at UCLA. We support the broad intent of the ordinance. We're in the hills because we love the wildlife, but it feels like there was a little lack of homework between when the broad outline was set out. And I would like to echo some of the previous speakers' concern for small homeowners with older houses and the impacts on them. And also the lack of cost benefit in terms of examining the benefit to the wildlife per impact on the homeowner. For instance, the specification of what can be planted within 30 feet of the houses does not take into account allergies that can occur to certain species. Some of the California natives are quite allergenic, and also that there are many wildlife supporting plants that are not specifically Californian, as we can see in our own backyard. The other thing is that there is an interaction between the wildfire clearance requirements, which cause you to have to take out a natural habitat and essentially it gets replaced by invasive grass, versus the specifications of what you can plant in a watered zone near your home, which could support a lot of wildlife. So echoing the good idea in general, do some homework to reduce impacts and think through the benefits to wildlife in a more specific way.
Thank you. Next we have Honey Nick. Oh, is Don Hardison on now? Don Hardison?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead, Mr. Hardison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been around for the Ridgeline Ordinance as well. I'm an attorney. I live in Upper Linda, Florida, and just, echoing the sentiments of a few of the prior speakers. But I mean, I have a redwood fence because it was 1/3 the price of Trex. And from what I understand from this ordinance, I'd have to rebuild in a fire retardant material, which means I can't build in wood anymore. My house is no more than 10 feet from my neighbor's home. And if both of us have to have a 5-seat setback, our new privacy fence is a concrete wall where our windows used to be. If there's a fire or an earthquake, we're basically all within the setback zones. We really can't rebuild our home. And it just smacks to me as a lawyer as kind of an ill thought out government taking of property without just compensation. And I don't feel like any of these speakers I've heard in support of this ordinance openly in public comment actually live here, or none of them stated they have. So it seems like we're a bunch of well-meaning property owners of probably a lot of older properties who are paying a lot of taxes, and our voices have not been heard heretofore, but I don't think we're going away. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Honey Nikfar.
Hi, I'm in opposition of this ordinance because I feel like this is punitive to the homeowners because it's somewhat of that ridgeline, or a little bit of that ridgeline ordinance. I'm even hearing words of mega mansions where technically if we're doing a ordinance about wildlife, mega mansions or the building of them are not as much into play as what we're hearing. So these hardships are really affecting people who already live here and already have built here or have had homes here for years. And it's creating a lot of issues in terms of parameters for my home that's on the ridge line. And I really feel that an environmental review is certainly due. And I feel like you're putting that ridgeline ordinance here smack in the middle of the wildlife ordinance, which does not make sense. You're just rewarding it so as to get your ordinance in, which I'm totally against. My house would be completely non-conforming based on what I'm reading, which would make it very, truly a big hardship for me to, if ever I want to sell. My steep slope would be affected. I'm thoroughly opposed to this, and I feel like we need definitely, you need to hear our voices as homeowners.
Thank you. Next, we have Wendy Sue Rosen. Go ahead.
Good evening. I want to echo some of the comments made. We've gotten to this place where one fence or structure in an inopportune location can completely block wildlife linkages. And the mountain lion that nobody's really mentioned is now a listed species of special concern, which means that the review in areas where single family residences are is going to have to rise to a higher level. And those regulations are coming. Also, we have 30 by 30, which is the governor's mandate to save 30% of land and water by 2030. The mayor has a state sustainability plan that he's had adopted in the city, and we have new fire codes. So we're looking at this ordinance sort of in a vacuum. And what we really need to do is we need to look at it compared to what the codes are now. I have a 5-foot setback on my side yard in the hills. And so what I'd like to know in the future from you guys is, what do these other ordinances require? Because I don't think these conditions or these policies are really as dramatic and punitive as people are saying. They're making it seem extremely scary. We're looking instead in a vacuum, and we need to be looking at the baseline hillside ordinance, the Mulholland specific plan, the setbacks that already exist, grading limits, and all the fire codes that are here. And by the way, when you rebuild your house, there are some requirements that you are allowed within a certain period of time to build within the same footprint. I don't know if that applies here, but if that doesn't apply, you will have to come up to code. All of us would have to come up to code to all the new standards and codes, which are, there's a lot of new codes that we have to look at. I want to just say two more things.
Wrap up.
It's alarming about this information that's been circulated to make this seem so scary. I think these are common sense policies that we need to implement. They've spent years with scientists looking at this ordinance and giving input. There are similar ordinances out there that you can look at that have not been punitive and they've been fine. We have precious natural resources that we could lose forever. We are in a climate emergency. This is about balance, if not now, when. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Heidi Mckay. Heidi Mckay, go ahead. You almost had it. Up, unmute, and then there you go.
I have to hold it down.
Okay.
Okay, sorry. Oh dear.
You're on mute, Heidi. Can you hear us? If you can hear us, push *9 to get off of mute. Or put *9, yeah.
Yeah, I just pressed the ask to unmute button.
There she is. Okay.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
I'm so sorry. Okay, so that took a bit of time, so I'm just going to keep it really, really short. I highly support this ordinance. It's long overdue. I too live near a ridgeline, but I am more than happy to have it. If there are any inconveniences, which I tend not to think there are, really, it's worth it. Again, it's been done in other cities successfully, and again, I just highly recommend it or support it as is. And Sorry for the muting problem, but anyway, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, Shirin Javid.
Good evening, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to share with you my opinion. I, like many others on the phone, live on Belle Road in a very old, 50-plus-year-old home, not a very big one, but it's my home. I spent all I had to purchase it and make it livable and live in it. And I sincerely believe that this ordinance will have a tremendously negative impact in me, my family, and my home. We cannot follow all of the requirements of the ordinance for all of the reasons of a lot of other people have said, and I won't waste your time, but I just want you to know that there are a group of people like myself who are going to be extremely hurt by this ordinance. So please reconsider. And all of those people who love the animals, and I'm one of them, there has to be a balance, and this is not the right balance. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you. Next, Elaine Cohn. Elaine, if you can unmute.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I wasn't going to comment, but I've been interested in watching what was presented and hearing the comments of many people. There is no question that the intent of an ordinance to protect wildlife is good, but I have two comments. One is the wildlife that we are protecting does not know about the map of the Beverly Crest Neighborhood Council. And I would imagine the wildlife must stray beyond the area that this ordinance will affect. So is there some intent? Is this a trial period, or is there no future? This is just for this certain area, and we're only going to address wildlife in this area. And if so, how does that really help wildlife? I mean, the minute a coyote strays out of that area, the minute a deer strays out of that area, or the minute a butterfly migrates out of that area to another area where they don't have the proper plants to support it, it just seems to me it doesn't really do what it's intended to do because of the limitation in area. And the second thing that I observed is I don't think that there's many of us here that really truly do understand this ordinance. It's tremendously difficult to read. I think that at least for the small homeowners affected by this, the neighborhood council should advocate on their behalf and ask that there be a couple of sessions at least where their questions could actually be answered. I'm not fit to answer those questions. I'm not sure anybody on your committee is in a position to answer those or understands. For instance, this lady that asked, what about my house? Or, you know, these people that are really justifiably worried about an earthquake or a wildfire destroying their house and them having nothing left to build. I think somebody should be able to address those concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, is there anyone else here in the public who would like to speak? All right, I see Sue. So Sue, go ahead, unmute.
Hi, thank you. I too, just like Elaine, have been sitting here listening to everything. And I think the one big thing that I also want to reiterate what Elaine said is that there are a lot of ambiguities to this ordinance. And I have to say, after lived now here for 7.5 years, and as a homeowner in Bel Air, we're on the Ridgeline, I don't recall ever getting any notification from any government agency, any homeowners association. Everything I've heard has been through word of mouth, through neighbors. And we've all kind of feel like we've been in the dark about what's been going on. And there are a lot of questions that have not been answered. And I think there needs to be, just like other people have said, I think Allison mentioned, you need to reach out to the homeowners. Every homeowner needs to be contacted directly about what is going on. And I think to minimize people's concerns and saying it's unjustified fear because they're worried about their home value, they're worried about this and that. Don't dismiss the homeowners. We all care about the environment. We care about the wildlife, but don't dismiss the homeowners. And some of the people on here who aren't even homeowners, I feel like are the ones that are really dismissing people's concerns and making it out like it's unjustified. So if it is unjustified, then let's inform the public. Let's have conversation and clear up the confusion and ambiguity.
Thank you. Next I see Jesse. Jesse, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to make public comment tonight. I'll keep it very short. Very simply, I do support the ordinance as it's written. I think the ordinance is important for our future as a city and as a society. And I really just strongly urge you to support it in its entirety. It's very important. Thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you. Next, Bruno Naylor. Bruno?
Hello. Hi, thanks for giving me the time to speak. I'm a younger resident in the Bel Air area, and I live off of Bel Air Road and Sandal Lane, kind of in between Beverly Glen and Bel Air Road. And we have a unique property, and a part of the value that we see in the property is the wildlife that we have. I also grew up in the area on the lower part by Glenroy, and I've seen kind of the wildlife disappear and so much development happening. Some of these corridors are extremely important. And I know a lot of the property, the people that are homeowners, I speak on their behalf as well, in terms of when you look at the value of your property and what you're able to build and what's currently taking place, just rethink on, what does make the real estate so valuable in the areas that you live in. And I think a big part of it is this natural environment that we have. One of the other points is this affects new construction. And I think a lot of the points that people have been making that are current homeowners that aren't doing new construction wouldn't have as many worries. And I think that it's really just something that we see as great value that this is taking place, and building lot line to lot line isn't necessarily good for your property values either.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who in the public who would like to speak? I don't see any hands left up. Okay, there we go. Jen Mangles, go ahead.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you for the time to speak. Actually, my name is Jenny Mangelsdorf. I've lived here for 60 years. My great-grandparents lived at Beverly Glen and Sunset. I have seen so many trees taken down over the years. I've seen so much wildlife gone, so many species gone. As that other lady said, if not now, when? This is desperately needed, and I wholly support it. And thank you for what you guys are doing.
Thank you. I've seen a D. Stanley sort of raise hand and not raise hand. I'm going to find you here allow you to talk just in case you did want to speak. You can unmute.
Thank
D.
you.
Stanley?
You know?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm Daryl Stanley. I've lived in Bel Air since 1973 in Savona Road. So I've seen a lot of development over time. This ordinance is really needed, but with a caveat here. The ordinance should have been around when Alonzo Bell started to develop Bel Air to begin with. Okay? It's not. And here we are in 2022 for the sake of argument. And here is the problem. We need to address the issue of one, yes, how do we provide wildlife preservation? And how do we protect those individuals, of which a good number, in fact, 11 on my Savona Road that would have been impacted with the ridgeline, allowed to remain? We need a quote, an adjustment that the footprint that's in existence at this moment in time is acceptable and overrides everything else to protect numerous people, the entire Linda Flora Upper to be protected, along Bel Air Road to be protected. We then realistically move forward, and the next question that needs to be asked, not to mention where's the environmental study and the impact on wildlife doing this. Next, what is the economics cost and the reduction in tax revenue as a result of this combination of a wildlife as well as a ridgeline ordinance mixed together? I would say we're looking at a number of $1 billion of reduced tax revenue. I shouldn't say revenue, value, and then consequent reduction in revenue.
Thank you.
So I'm really looking forward to a lot of answers. And unfortunately, this is too vague and too detrimental and draconian to too many older people in Bel Air. Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the public? If you're on the phone, it's *9. If anyone who hasn't spoken already would like to speak, you can go ahead and raise your hand now. Okay. So, Mr. Chair, you can close the public hearing now.
Okay, public hearing is closed. I did mention before about this is not going to be, we don't think it's going to be the last meeting. We're going to have another meeting like this. That's to be announced. We're also going to be discussing this at the Land Use Committee. I'm not sure whether it's going to be this month, could be in January. We'll see what that looks like. And we're going to be at the Neighborhood Council maybe in late January or early February to make a decision as to what kind of letter we're going to write. I have been taking, Robin, I got 4 pages of notes. I got the names of the people and what they're bringing up. All right. And believe it or not, after I make the notes, I can actually read them this time. Okay. So I will try to get these typed up by tomorrow, if possible, and start circulating them, because I know who's pro, I know who's con, I know a number of issues they brought up. So we can start there for the next meeting. There's plenty of material right here. Jamie.
I had a different impression about how this was going to go. I thought we were going to have public comment, and then we were going to have some deliberation by the board. That was what I thought that we were going to do tonight, and I would suggest that that's how we proceed.
We will. I just want to make sure that it doesn't run really late, but yes.
No, I think we should deliberate and we should discuss this until 9 o'clock. So we should talk about what we've heard, and that way, when we and we're building on things with the hope that eventually we'll come back with a draft letter.
Right.
Okay.
So can I start off?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Oh, Jamie,
Yeah.
one thing. I just want to say thank you. That was a fabulous presentation, and thank you so much.
Yes, no problem. Definitely. I mean, it was high level because there's other things. It's not possible to explain it all.
Well,
and I have questions, and part of our letter could actually be literally just like, I don't understand this, and I want clarification on that.
Absolutely.
The number one thing I think that we need to get confirmation from the Department of City Planning is that existing homeowners that are not adding more than 500 square feet to their home are not subject to these regulations.
Right. And the second thing I think is it keeps coming up. If my house burns down.
Right. Exactly. I think there should be some sort of like, we think that, I don't know how the board thinks or the committee thinks, but it seems like there's general consensus from the constituents that there should be an exception if a house burns down, is destroyed from compliance with the ordinance. I think that's what the members of the public want.
I agree.
Agree completely.
A lot of that was discussed, and I believe that people who have a home, they can't build back 75%. They should be able to build back 100%. Whether they go over there or not is a subject for discussion.
Yeah.
But they
We'll
should
just
be
write
able
that
to
down.
rebuild
Exception
what they
from
lost.
compliance with regulations for homes destroyed through act of God.
Right.
Yeah. So that you bring up that the only thing is that now it's one thing to build back to what they had. It's another thing if they want to build back, and let's say they've a 2,000 square foot house and now they want to build a 5,000 square foot house.
That's different.
So that's different. If they want to build back to what they had, fine.
Back to previous.
And what? Plus, you want to give them the extra 500 square feet?
Right.
Yes.
Plus the 500 square feet, maybe. But beyond that, then they're subject.
Well, let's talk about that. I also heard people say that they actually, let's leave, if we got to read that one sentence is actually super important. It says projects that only involve interior construction and additions that do not exceed 500 square feet are not subject to the provisions of this section.
Okay, so isn't this supposed to be a private meeting? Right now?
No, this is a public meeting.
No, this is a public meeting. The public is here. They're as if we were in the room together.
Oh, okay, I thought, I was under the impression this was going to be private.
No, we can't do that.
Okay, that's what somebody told me beforehand. I just wanted to make sure.
Okay, let's just continue.
Yep.
So I'm going to read this sentence here. That the last 5 words in this sentence are actually important, and I think that it addresses some of the things that people are saying.
Okay.
Projects that only involve interior construction and additions that do not exceed 500 square feet are not subject to the provisions of this section, comma, except within a resource buffer.
Okay.
So if you're in a resource buffer, you're subject to the regulations if you're doing interior construction and if you're doing an addition of less than 500 square feet. And we have some people who say that they literally live on a resource buffer and they feel that they're being treated unfairly as a result. I am inclined, my opinion would be to get rid of it, except within a resource buffer, because maybe there's another way to slice or dice this, but some people have existing homes that are on a resource buffer. And they're saying it's unfair to have this ordinance apply to them when everyone else gets to be basic, when 99.9% of people are not subject to it. What's everyone else's thought on that?
I would agree. I agree with that.
I agree, but there should also be some modification, not a complete abandonment of their property. But there might be a leeway as far as the height of the fence or the length of the fence, something else, but the buffer zone, there needs to be a modification for them because they are entitled to rebuild and to expand if they want to, but
see if you don't
within reason
further encroach into the resource buffer. Maybe
exactly. Yes, I agree. That's a great idea.
I mean, this is we can, I don't know. I'm just saying that that's an issue. Like that there's some people that are in like their parcel, like a part of their parcel may touch a resource buffer.
It's a big issue. Yeah, the big issue. And they need
if they're not expanding into the resource buffer, they're going to get captured.
Can I just raise a point I think that's relevant to this here is the definition of resources. Some of them are natural features. Some of them are also is quote open space, and open space at the moment is mapped as every parcel that's owned by a public entity as open space, including, and so I live in Beverly Glen, full disclosure, and there are a lot of single lots that have been purchased by the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy as a means to avoid further development up into the hills. So, for example, at the end of the street I'm on, there's a series of lots there that are owned, and it's basically completely fuel modded. There's it's grasses essentially at this point. Because that's owned by the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, that's identified as a resource, and it gets the buffer. And because we have small lots in this canyon, there are 3 homes that lie entirely within the buffer of that lot, which has, I would argue, it has open space value, but its real purpose from a conservation perspective is to keep the development from continuing further up the road, right, into a section that's not developed. And so those are 3 homes that would be entirely, under this language, would be entirely subject to all of the restrictions of the ordinance.
That's a good point.
Yes.
Because basically, if your next door lot is an open space zone lot, that means you essentially have a 50-foot like side back or side yard setback.
Right. And so unlike a creek, which all creeks kind of have a certain inherent biological value, not every lot that is owned as open space has its biological conservation value isn't necessarily the same as, say, a creek, right? Anyway, I just want to sort of make that point because I think it paints every lot with the same brush. And there's a lot of nuance among them in terms of the value and purpose for which they were purchased. That's all I wanted to say about that.
I know money's the issue, but what about an actual wildlife survey of some kind?
Can we, before moving on to new topics, at least sort of like capture like what comment has been received and ask whether or not any sort of consensus can be reached on that? And I see Maureen has her hand up.
Bringing up, there's others.
Well, yeah, on that issue, basically the issue, the big picture issue is that people who have existing homes are going to get caught up within this resource buffer requirement and are not going to be able to make any changes without being subject to the regulations. That's essentially right. We don't necessarily have to recommend what the solution is. We can just say this is a concern. So we need to, can we all agree that that's a concern?
Yes, I would go a step further, Jamie. If they happen to be in a resource buffer that was identified 30 years after that house was built, they should be able to go back in and rebuild, however, not have any additions. Any additions homes that are located, making it larger.
Within 50 feet of resource buffer cannot make any changes without being subject to regulations or applying for a variance. Because remember, that's the only mechanism for getting relief from that buffer requirement is seeking a variance. Except for
one problem. Depending on who the ZEA is, you can get a difference of opinion as to how they're going to rule. That's the problem with zoning administration.
I'm just going to say we think that the city might reconsider this, or should we just say the public has expressed, the committee is concerned that this might be.
And do we want to take into consideration what Travis just mentioned too, is that it also depends on the particular buffer, but
okay.
not all buffers are created equal.
Okay, I brought that down as a note. Okay, maybe, but how do you design a regulation that can be applied uniformly? That's sort of hard. And I see Maureen's had her hand up forever. Let me just put this note down and then I'll take your comment. Maybe city should evaluate, there should be some sort of relief valve, essentially. Development of a relief valve that's less onerous than a variance.
You're going to let Maureen talk?
Yes, go ahead, Maureen.
No, this was far more important. I wanted to address notification of homeowners.
Yes,
I think that was a major complaint or a reoccurring one. And since our newspapers really don't cover this and our news TV doesn't really cover these issues, I know that they sent with that Ridgeline ordinance, there was a flyer sent out by the city. Also, I think homeowners need to also step up to the plate and join their homeowners association, or at least get their newsletters and look at the Bel Air Beverly Crest Neighborhood Council website to see upcoming meetings. I mean, everybody has to work at it to get this information, because it's not really being presented like in LA Times or on the television networks. So maybe we can ask them to send out a flyer to get started. I'm not sure. How do we get that word out?
I'm not so sure it should be done now, but if we can get them to rewrite part of the code that we're concerned about, at that point, a flyer maybe should be sent out telling them.
So better notification, this is what you're saying, Maureen.
What?
Maureen's saying that she wants better notification.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
that's a concern that we've heard from a lot of people. I don't, so I'll just put that down. We think that the city should have, there will be, when the CPC considers this, by the way, because it's a zoning ordinance, I believe that there's going to be a big notification like they did for Ridgeline. The city tries not to do that, at too many junctures throughout the process, because you can imagine sending out that number of mailings is not cheap. But we need to get clarification about what the city's intent is in terms of notifying people within the pilot study area.
So here's a question that I have, and we were talking about DWP and the and about the 405 Sepulveda Pass and notification. This came up because they're looking to the communities and the neighborhood councils to do the work for them. So we know that this has been going on for 6 years. We know that there were hearings. We know that we put out the word, and we asked the HOAs to put out the word about when there was something up at the Sookie Goldman up in Franklin Canyon. So there were 2 outreach meetings. So the question is, it's not that there hasn't been any word on communication. There has been communication with the community. And I know that we had things in the Benedict Canyon Association newsletter. We sent out emails. I believe we had something in our newsletter as well. But of course, we know it doesn't always reach everybody. And of course, not everybody reads and looks at these articles. So the question is direct mail the only way to reach people, which we know is much more expensive?
Well, EDD is, I don't know if EDD is more expensive, every door direct mail. The problem is if people don't want to read it, they'll take it from the mailbox and throw it in the trash. You're not going to be able to make them read it.
Let's really focus in on the comments about the draft ordinance, though. Like, what are the aspects of the ordinance that we have questions with, that we generally support, that we think might need to be modified, also taking into consideration the public comment that we've heard tonight.
Okay.
What other comments do committee members have?
Well, the fence, I'm looking, and I took notes as well, so let me look.
I'll bring up a quick one, trash containers.
Yeah.
All right.
Remember, those are only for new development or people with 5 who are doing major remodels. I think people do not understand that. 99.9% of people will not be subject to these regulations.
Why do Jamie, when was the last time that a trash container, I mean, we've been all over the canyons, come on. Trash containers go out on a day of the week, they're at the side of the house. What's the deal about securing a trash container?
Oh, okay.
And I know that animals can get into it. I've seen raccoons in ours, but I think that's one of the items where we're just going a little too far reaching that.
Okay,
really
I'll put that down as a comment from Bob. Bob, skeptical of trash enclosure requirement. Okay.
Right.
So
there's two, I see that Sean has his hand up and Travis has his hand up too.
Oh, do you want me to go?
Yeah, go ahead, Sean.
Okay, sorry. And I apologize, this could be a bit of a stream of consciousness thing here. I'm kind of just thinking out loud, but you know, I went through the ordinance and it seems somewhat, and I don't necessarily mean this in bad ways, it's somewhat superficial, meaning it's trash enclosures, fence spacing, things like that. You know, obviously there was reoccurring concern over property values, loss of property values, loss of development rights, things like that. So I, you know, just kind of going through, you know, the front and rear yard setback requirements on this were 10-foot minimum. Most of the zones and hillsides are 15 to 20-foot minimum, or they're a percentage of the lot depth, which is usually greater than 10 feet. And anything, and it also calls out the prevailing setback requirement. So anyone that's on a limited hillsides, a substandard limited hillside street, which is a dedication of 36 feet and a improvement of 28 feet. If you're less than that, you get an automatic 5-foot setback. So, and that's called out in this ordinance. So it's pretty much status quo. I don't think this ordinance really calls out anything. It's not, there's no difference. Side setback, it said 5 foot. Well, that's current code. Plus current code says any 10 foot above 18 foot in height, you got to tack on an extra foot. So current code for almost everybody is actually 6 or 7 foot side yard setback. So again, the side yard setback's basically exactly the same or slightly less, depending on which one overrides which. The lot coverage for impermeable spaces, that can probably get a little bit.
Can we pause that for just a second though, because it's one thing we didn't talk about is the section C. It says relationship to other zoning regulations. It says whenever the provisions of the wildlife ordinance conflict within provisions of supplemental use districts, specific plans, overlays, or the underlying zone, the wildlife ordinance provisions shall prevail unless explicitly specified in this ordinance. So if this ordinance, one of the things we need to be cautious of is whether or not this ordinance actually relaxes any standards, like you said, the setback standards that currently exist. Do you think that they would do so?
This is my back of the napkin kind of going through. So I got to see if there was a provision that called out, you know, as it applies to the current provision in what 1221 C10, because that's where all the hillside regs are at. So, so I was just kind of flipping through to compare current code to what they're proposing. So anyway, side yard setbacks are either exactly the same because of current code or 5 foot plus, or they're actually relaxed under this code. The impermeability coverage, we already have lot coverage limitations of 40%, I believe, but there is a difference. There's a 6 foot height difference for lot coverage. So you're likely not really going to feel this unless your lot is bigger than 20,000 square foot. Maybe if you're over 15,000 square foot, you might start to feel this one.
Could you go back and explain what you just said about the 6 foot height?
So the code says, and it gets misinterpreted sometimes. So you can't have more than a 40% lot coverage. Traditionally, you just think of a house, and so it's obviously more than 6 foot. But when you've got structures that are more than 6 foot, oftentimes it's, say, an elevated driveway or a cantilever deck. If that thing sticks up more than 6 foot above grade, then that counts towards your lot coverage.
Okay.
So you already have lot coverage limitations, but this isn't a lot coverage, it's an permeability coverage. So they actually in this code call out driveways that would count towards it. So it doesn't really start to bite you until you're probably around 15,000 square foot lot or bigger. If you're less than a 15,000 square foot lot, you're likely going to feel about the same regulations that you already currently have under the lot coverage provision. A lot of the fence stuff doesn't really doesn't concern me a whole lot, meaning, when I was in the council office, anyone who knows when I had to come speak at the neighborhood councils and there were variance requests for heights, side and rear yard fences, we always said no spikes on the fences because it's a pretty gruesome death for anything that tries to jump over it and doesn't make it. And there's only one guy in the city, I'm told, that has a gun that can come put that poor animal out of its misery. So fence stuff that just kind of, is what it is. I don't see that to be terribly damaging to property values or anything like that. It's just a new standard or material kind of thing. I honestly don't quite understand the resource buffer, so I'll just kind of throw that one out there as I have a question about that. Meaning, is there a distance there for new structures, existing structures? I didn't read that anywhere with regards to the resource buffers. To me, the big limitation that I need to digest that sounds like what actually has the potential to cause a smaller house to have actual repercussions for current or future development is really F3, and that's the grading section and the square footage section. So I think that one has to be digested because you start dealing with remedial grading and things like that. And this is the big area where a lot of folks are able to kind of skate through how they, rob Peter to pay Paul when it comes to grading and things like that. And that's where you could actually get some real limitations on structures that could cause the heartburn that we're hearing about. Let me see here.
You notice I ended up skirted through that section a little bit because it was complicated.
No, it is. That's the thing. That's the one section to me that is complicated, nuanced, and you actually have to spend a lot of time talking about grading and okay, what is remedial? What do you mean by 60% slope? How does that compare with today's codes? I think as I read through that is the only section that has any real potential for limitation of development. The rest of it is, it's just changing of materials, don't have bright lights, things like that. And I think just another side note, and I'll finish up. The lighting section or not lighting, I'm sorry, the landscaping section where you've got, buffer A, you've got section A, section B, section C. I'm a smart guy, but I don't have the bandwidth to kind of digest that kind of thing. And I feel like those kinds of code provisions only require more experts to be hired to just do a simple plan for a house. And now I've got to do buffer. Where's buffer A stop? Where's buffer B? And to me, that becomes way too nuanced. I would just rather them say, when you're doing landscaping, it's got to be 85%, natural or indigenous or whatever, and just be done with it, as opposed to 1% versus another percent. I think that's onerous and just getting to a level of detail that just seems a bit crazy.
I think you're right. That this gets a lot of work for a lot of people that are arborists or something.
It's the Full Employment Act, right? So, So to me, everything I just said, to me, the big kind of scary / question mark is F3, square footage and grading. To me, that's the thing that if, the validity of people saying I'm concerned about my property values, that's where it's at. Everything else is already covered by current code, or it's just okay, I can't put spikes on top of my wrought iron. Okay, I have to have some kind of opaqueness to my fence. That's kind of just superficial stuff to a certain extent, as long as it's not, again, being onerous where it's have to follow 35 of those things. So anyway, sorry, I told you, I warned you up front, I was going to ramble a bit.
So we have Travis, Maureen, and Stephanie.
Okay, so just to share some thoughts about this that have come up as I've looked through it and from the testimony tonight. First, to answer a question that was raised about what about everywhere else? If this is the wildlife area, what about the other places? This is designed and intended as a pilot ordinance, meaning it starts here, you work the kinks out, and then it would get applied to other areas around the city that have already been, in fact, mapped, that would be known as protected areas for wildlife, PAWS, P-A-W-S. Yeah, very cute. And there's a map for that that the city has prepared that basically, if you want to think about it, it's kind of the rim of the valley, the rest of the hillsides, and there's a few areas down in the South Bay associated with Palos Verdes Peninsula and San Pedro, and some other places. But it's really sort of the hillside areas, rim of the valley. It probably coincides quite highly with the very high fire hazard severity zone. Right. So, and in that respect, we need to put ourselves, when we think about this ordinance, in the view of thinking, not only is it appropriate for this area, but also is it appropriate for all those other areas to which it may then be applied once it is, assuming that something eventually here is adopted, and that helps us understand things like trash enclosures. Trash enclosures are important where you have bears. And Beverly Crest has not had bears for, I don't know, what is it, 140 years or something? And so that's not one where I would certainly put all my apples in terms of wanting to, fight for something for trash enclosures in this area. However, for our areas of the city that are high fire hazard zones, wildlife zones, that abut to areas with bears, which exist, then that's absolutely something that would make a whole lot of sense to include as a thing for new construction, even if it's a rebuild, to be able to have and secure that trash to minimize bear-human conflicts, right? And so that kind of addresses, I think, some of these things in two ways. One, we're the first, but there's an intention and already a map of where this would be rolled out other places. And so we've got to think about these things in those respects. And maybe we say, and in this instance I would say to the city, you can do a little mix and match here. This isn't, none of our native wildlife here right now in this area can open the city trash cans. So let's leave that aside.
Well, in the supplemental use district, Travis, and a perfect example is when it went from CD5 to CD4 because of the topography, the closeness of the houses and everything else. They had some changes that they had to make to fit their areas. And in a supplemental use district, that's encouraged. I mean, that's what they do.
Right. So one should be able to tailor it to the area. So not a bad idea, just appropriate in a different place. The second question that I think that we ought to really dial in on, and I really appreciate Member Bayless's comments here, is understanding where these restrictions are tighter or looser than existing code, and whether or not it overrides the ordinance and other ordinances and may in fact loosen them in some instances. And it has been an issue of some concern from the outset, the language in here saying if this conflicts with any other ordinance, it overrides it. That means, I think, it would override the Mulholland specific plan.
Exactly.
Right? And the baseline mansionization ordinance and the hillside construction regulation. I mean, there's just whatever. It's like when you have that language in there, you've got to be really sure that this is the thing that we really want.
It's dangerous.
In whatever direction it might be. So I think including in our letter something that addresses that concern, I think would be appropriate. Setbacks.
Right. Should we include language on that relationship to other zoning regulations? We should say that rather than these ordinances, this ordinance always prevails. It should be the most restrictive language that exists prevails.
Yes.
I mean,
that's a good suggestion, Jamie. Absolutely.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead. You were
Right.
talking about
And so I think that we should talk a little bit about setbacks. And if it is indeed the case that the 10-foot front yard setback is the status quo, um, because there are instances where ecologically, biologically, wildlife, it makes more sense to be closer to the road so that you don't go farther down the hill or into the hill, right? So there are, in fact, in certain instances, very good reasons to, substandard street, very steep topography, where it makes sense in terms of a impact analysis perspective to not have to uh, keep that 10 feet on the front. And so, but I would have to defer to people who understand the other existing ordinances better than I do in order to figure out what to say about that. Um, my general assessment, and maybe again, this comes out in the intersection with existing code as well, is that small lots um, are particularly vulnerable to feeling like they're being really boxed in under this ordinance in a way that is perhaps not necessarily or appropriate for the permeability issues that is the intent of the ordinance. I understand if you've got a 20,000 square foot property and fences going all the way, an impervious perimeter fence around that, I think is a challenge. But there are many, as I think I've said before, there are many small properties that really, the things that are going to move through the neighborhood are already moving through the neighborhood, and they're not operating with a whole lot of space to have the fence be a setback. People with pets, people with kids, this sort of impermeable stuff. When you're on a 2,500 to 5,000 square foot lot, it leaves you basically with nothing. To say that you can't have an impermeable fence at your property line, and if that's I have to recognize that that is an issue. Um, and in fact, I don't know necessarily with those small areas, unless, and this is the problem, because we're trying to achieve connectivity across a large area by applying specific rules on every single property and the same rules on every single property. Because there's no mechanism here to identify this is actually where we have a choke point for wildlife, or this is a place where we really, these property owners, if they could just give us 10 feet on either side of that property line, we could have some movement up through this canyon. This guarantees that, but it guarantees it by applying the same rule to the entire area, right? And every property, even where, frankly, it's not actually necessary for movement. And I say that fully recognizing the testimony that we've heard that the wrong fence in the wrong place can be a real problem. But the challenge that they've dealt with that challenge by applying a standard across every property, as opposed to a process that identifies where those choke points are and say, this area here is really critical, and this area here is really critical. And I know there's not time necessarily to go back and make that revision. I just want to raise it in terms of, again, back to disclosure here. I work on connectivity too. I've done camera trap studies. I've done camera trap studies of wildlife in this area. And I've published on it. So I'm not making this up when I say we've got permeability, even on, of most of the species, pretty much everywhere in the status quo. And there's just a few things that we've got to worry about. Mountain lions and mule deer are, vulnerable to this. Although mountain lions are probably going to jump over any fence anyway and not care. And the smaller things, raccoons, opossums, bobcat's going to jump over it. Raccoons, they don't need our help, and they're not necessarily sensitive, and they're probably subsidized by us anyway, and the opossums as well. So the question I'm trying to get to here is, what is the focus, the focal species for the setbacks in terms of the fencing? And I think we've got to think hard about this from a conservation perspective, so that we don't engender resistance across a wide swath of the public to achieve something that could be achieved another way. Okay, and I know that probably seems odd coming from your representative of open space concerns on the council here, but it's coming from a perspective of having dealt with conservation planning for a very long time, and actually having data about what's moving around where, at least using camera trap work. And I got to tell you, this is a blunt instrument to achieve the goal that we all want to achieve. Okay, so I'll leave that aside for a second.
Maureen Levinson and Stephanie Savage have had their hand up a long time. Maureen?
I'll hold my remainder of my half-hour diatribe for later.
Maureen, go ahead.
Well, thanks. I was just thinking about communication with the public. Does the Department of City Planning have a chart that shows what the existing ordinance or rules are for all these things we're addressing in the wildlife pilot study? The existing and what would change or would be loosened or tightened? I think if our residents can look at a chart, that would help guide them and maybe realize that some of this isn't so bad as what they think, or what is bad. Do we ask Department of City Planning to do that?
It would have to be in sections or else it'd be too small to understand or read.
I think Sean volunteered to put that together, right?
Uh-oh, that's...
Yeah.
Stephanie, you're next, I think.
Stephanie, yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
So I read this a while back. The one thing that really stood out to me was that the grading limited to slopes of 60%. It seemed punitive, because if anybody will look at any slope analysis over the last 10 years, or whenever we started doing those, the majority of the hillside RFA is in the 60% to 99% for your house. So I don't know why they chose to pick that item when instead they could do something like picking lot coverage or a smaller footprint, because then that allows more movement around your property. That seems like a more obvious one to me. But also too, going back to that 60% grade, so does that mean that if you get a slope analysis, then that's then eliminated? Or does that mean that if you go to by right RFA, will you not have to even mention the fact that a lot of your RFA might be coming from 60%? So that's a little nuance in there that that I would look at and wonder about. As for the remedial grading, I think that if somebody has if they have a problematic geology on their site, I think that maybe that should count towards their towards the grading. I think that was mentioned in there. That's all I have.
The problem with the remedial grading is that contractors push it all the time. All
well,
right?
It's not necessarily validated.
It's not. Go ahead, Steph.
Yeah, it's not necessarily validated. Maybe this is pushing that to the surface, is saying now you have to really prove that is actually remedial grading. I think that's maybe what this is, why this is here.
Well, we're trying to address that with the hillside construction regulations we're adding too.
I want to say one other thing about remedial grading. I've been involved in a variety of projects in the hills where because what we have left is like the leftover lots, and the lots that are problematic. They had steep slopes, or maybe they have been the site of some sort of ancient landslide. There's some geologic problems, and so what I've seen is one way to deal with that is to literally scrape the lots to remove all that and put up these giant retaining walls, and that comes at the cost of like just utter destruction. Removal of protected trees. And I love that one sentence. It says remedial grading that would result in substantial landform alteration shall not be permitted where project alternatives including but not limited to deepened foundations, caissons, soldier piles, could be utilized to provide equivalent geologic stability. And that's actually what I learned through that process, is that there's a safety factor that the grading division wants you to get at. And there are different ways to get to that safety factor. But developers often just want to choose the most common mechanism, which is just to scrape the lot and put in some retaining walls. Yeah. But that's the cheapest option. It's also the most environmentally destructive option. But there are other ways to do it. And so what this says is that you must demonstrate that those other things are not possible in order to do that scrape the lot scenario. So I'm sorry to butt in there, but it seemed like it was an appropriate time to talk about that remedial grading issue.
I think it's got to be an issue that's addressed with this.
But Stephanie, what were you saying with remedial grading? Did you have a comment? I'm taking notes, right? Do you support what this says about remedial grading, or do you think it should be changed in some way?
I think it should be counted and validated.
Should be counted and validated. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's put in here for a reason. I think it's just something to look at and ask more questions. I think that oftentimes when you see remedial grading, it doesn't seem justified exactly in my observation.
Yeah, I like the ones that have 995 cubic yards of dirt and remedial gradings 1,000 cubic yards.
Yeah, exactly. Super.
Okay.
Yeah. That is warning signs coming up.
Hello. Yeah, that's a red flag.
Yeah. Mindy has her hand up.
Yes. So I want to ask Travis a couple questions and just to think about the fencing again, only because it seemed again to be a big question with people in terms of security. People questioned, the validity of fencing, and together with that, they questioned whether or not there had been scientific research behind all of this, and they wanted to see the science. So as a scientist, researcher, et cetera, Travis, maybe you could address, how much science there is and has been done in preparation for this ordinance, because I know that they look to you to supply, certainly at least in one area, some of the scientific background, not on the fencing per se, but at least in another area. So that's one question, one thing I wanted you to address. And I had a question, because I hear what you're saying about the fencing and how it may not be so critical in some of the smaller lots, when indeed in the bigger areas and other places, there's enough passage for the animals, and what is it really achieving? And that you're saying the mountain lions will jump over anyways, and in many cases, and it's really just maybe it's for the deer, and what are we really trying to achieve, and to look at it a little more carefully. So I hear what you're saying, which I confess I was a little surprised by, but I'm taking it in. And I'm going to have a specific question about that. Because, when they were looking at the fencing, they were also saying not just that it had to be, the opacity, and having space for the animal to pass through, and also the height, but they were also talking about the bottom. So obviously they were also addressing certain animals, in my mind, that maybe not so much passing through or couldn't jump over, but that perhaps were either shorter or smaller that would pass by walking through underneath. Was what I thought they were thinking of, addressing that as well. And one of the things I thought of when I thought of that, I thought of quail, which are, and small birds that really kind of more walk on the ground as opposed to flying, high up. Because there was a big development above me where they fenced the entire thing with chain link. And I used to have quail that used to come from the hillside above me on a regular basis, walk down the hillside and come into my yard. And as soon as that was built, and as soon as they put in that chain link fence, they stopped coming.
Amy, what's the thing on permeable? Is it 18 inches above ground level?
I don't know off the top of my head.
You don't know?
Not off the top of my head.
So I guess my question is, if that is indeed the case, and if that's why they stopped coming through, there could be, it's also because the vegetation was changed. So I don't know if it was just the chain link or if it was for other reasons. And it's tall, it's 8 feet tall. if you have, let's say that you had a row of small, like for example, part of Beverly Glen where the professors live, you know, a lot of the professors live, there's a long row of many small lots. So it's not just one lot that's small, but if there's huge development with many small lots, what would happen then in terms of the passage of animals if we did say that we didn't have the setbacks in an area like that?
Sure. So the lot size sort of bakes in the impact in places like Beverly Glen. Once you've got these small lots, it's going to be overall less permeable to wildlife. But the key about all these discussions that I think is a lot of that's already done, right? And changing the fencing requirement for those lots, even if they rebuild, is not going to take the genie back out of the bottle. I doubt that your quail are stopped by a chain link fence. You know, they can come right over. That's a habitat issue, and that gets to the requirements about vegetation and landscaping and the footprint of a development. The footprint of development absolutely does matter. But when we're talking about, you know, the goal of the ordinance that Jamie said at the beginning, which is about connectivity, what are the things, what do we, you know, what do we know, what are the things that are actually being blocked that this ordinance is going to fix, right? You know, what are the species? And I always ask this because it is so easy from a, you know, sort of a general conservation perspective to say connectivity is good. We want this to be connected to that, and then there's gene flow, and, you know, everything can stay healthy and whatnot. And in some instances, it's really crystal clear that it's important, like the overpass over the 101 freeway so that the Santa Monica Mountains are connected to points north. There's a hard and ironclad case for the utility and the need for that, right? Because every time a mountain lion tries to go across the freeway, it gets killed. Right. So the question is, what, especially in a rebuild situation on a 5,000 square foot lot that's next to another 5,000 square foot lot that's next to a 2,500 square foot lot, are we going to does that need to be permeable to something, or is everything that needs to get around is not going to go through the developed area already, right? So I'm kind of talking about there are and I have this arbitrary cutoff in my head that's like about 10,000 square feet, right? Above 10,000 square feet, you've kind of got enough room to start dealing with these, you know, setbacks for permeable versus impermeable and making sure that there's wildlife movement. But places that are already platted out into 5,000 square foot, unless there's some really clear, you know, connection that needs to be made, probably we're not having any benefit there compared to, you know, what we would have otherwise, because yeah. However, you go to things like lighting. Lighting makes a big difference. Our wildlife has moved a lot of its activity toward the night because we're very active during the day as a species, and they don't like it being brighter, and there's all sorts of impacts of lighting, and we can even track the most likely route that big animals like mountain lions move across the landscape by tracking what the darkest route is. So that, if we want to talk about permeability of this area as a whole, I would focus, that is a worthwhile thing to do. And so, but again, I think as we get down to these smaller properties, we're better off just recognizing that they're developed and focusing on bigger properties and if one could identify, and I think that the Santa Monica Mountain Conservancy has these maps that show sort of the linkages and the habitat blocks and whatnot. So, and Jamie can remind me if they've done this whole area yet or not. But to focus on those as places for connectivity, because I'm thinking about the big thing here is making sure that the deer can get from patch to patch. Because frankly, the mountain lion, as long as they're comfortable and they've acclimated to an area, how many of us have now seen on the evening news, you know, mountain lion blithely walking down the street in Studio City, you know, and captured on the Ring camera, right? So yeah, I just, there's just a need to focus on what it is we're really, but I do think that this matters for deer, right? And that having barriers for the deer and small, and because without the deer we don't have the rest of the you know, we don't have the top predator. And so yeah, I think it's while supporting, again, as many people have, where we're headed here. I think we got to be careful about making sure we're not making people do things that aren't helpful on a 2,500 or 5,000 square foot lot.
So at what point, I mean, I'm not, again, because if we're going to make a recommendation, I remember you said, I mean, we talked about this, that we're not necessarily telling them what the answer is, but if we're applying science, which is what we're talking about, and you're saying that maybe this conservancy has these maps.
And this is part of the challenge of this being written as a generalized ordinance that could be applied once it's done here elsewhere. Because basically what I'm saying is that for the maximum benefit to disruption, and really considering the politics of getting something through, right, as well, that one would want to tailor this to the needs of connectivity for this particular landscape. Whereas if you think about it as a pilot ordinance that could be replicated in other places, you can't just replicate if you've tailored the ordinance based on the geography of the place that you're implementing. Right? And this is the challenge of the drafting of the ordinance.
Right.
And look, I'm open to the argument that, hey, if this is, and I've yet to see that it actually is, no different than existing code, okay, great, but I'd really want to see that analysis to know that, and make sure that we focus the political goodwill behind an ordinance on things that are going to have the maximum benefit.
Okay, so I just want to say a couple of things, and then shouldn't we try to conclude this at like 9:30, our deliberations? I think it's 9:24.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, so I do want to just note, and this sort of follows up with Travis, what you're saying, and we have a lot of small lots in Laurel Canyon, 2,500 to 5,000 square feet. So the idea that you would just exclude all of those lots from these regulations does not sit well with me at all.
But I didn't say all the regulations. I was talking specifically about fencing.
Yeah. And I know of a specific place just down the street from me where there's 2 large habitat blocks that one person put up a fence, and that's where the deer were getting from one place to another. And the deer do not cross there anymore, period, end of story. And now they're trying to cross somewhere else, and literally multiple times a year, we see them almost get run over by cars, to the point where the neighbors had to go buy like deer crossing signs and put them up to try to alert the public. So, every little bit counts. That's a small little lot right there. It was like,
okay,
so like, I don't know.
I hear you. And this is the key this is the focus. Is the focus here, the connectivity is really about, it's really about deer.
He does not have the bandwidth to do the kind of analysis that you aspire to do. That is not possible.
Right. Okay. And so we're left with a application to every lot.
Yep, that's right. Because we're the city of Los Angeles, we're the second largest city in the United States, and they are not going to behave as nimbly as a scientist would want. They just aren't. They're an old dog, and they're going to learn any new tricks. I mean, that's just my opinion on it.
Yep.
The other thing is that the ordinance has, like, if you look at like what the purpose was in the motion and what the purpose is in the purpose statement in the ordinance itself, it has evolved a little bit. And I think that's okay and appropriate. It's not just about, a wildlife corridor, just animals going from point A to point B. It says the purpose of the wildlife ordinance is to maintain and protect existing wildlife and their ecosystems, and to provide co-benefits, including climate resilience, resource management, and public health, providing standards and regulations applicable to development in ecologically important areas. So it's not just about animals getting, traversing from one place to another. They need to have a habitat to do all the other stuff that they do. That's just one thought I had. The other thought is on the tree stuff. I'm really concerned that in section 5C that you might be able to remove a native tree without a tree removal permit, because it says if you look at, if these are supposed to trump all other regulations, this section of the ordinance says that you can remove a native tree so long as you replace it at a 4:1 ratio. It says nothing about getting a tree removal permit. It says nothing about the required finding of necessity. So I'm concerned about that. So I'm going to mark that as one of Jamie's comments.
I think we made a note about that at the time when we were reviewing it.
Yeah. So I'm going to add that. I've been taking notes. I'll share my notes with everybody. Are there other people that want to speak before it turns to 9:30? Okay, let's talk just a little bit about like how we're going to proceed with this.
Yeah.
Don's put his hand up.
Oh, Don. Go ahead, Don.
I believe that we need another meeting before we go to the land use committee. We don't have enough answers at this point, at least one meeting.
Well, I'm wondering, Don has his hand up, so I don't know if Don wants to speak, but I'm wondering if it might make sense for someone on the committee, like if we designate 2 people here or 3, to start putting together some sort of draft letter so that it's not just open dialogue, that we're like actually working from something at our next meeting.
Yep.
So we have like a very, very rough draft letter, and then we can work from that so that we're as productive as we should be. Does that make sense to this joint committee?
It makes sense. Who's going to?
I would like to be involved in it. Sure, Travis would. Mindy would.
Mindy would. I think 3 is enough just for the basic draft letter.
I volunteered you, Travis. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, no, and look, I think this is really tough, right? Because you get the intent, but you also hear what it turns into. And so, yes, I want to participate in that, and it would be fruitful to take all the, we've all made a lot of notes. I especially, just if I can take a second here, point of privilege before Don speaks, to thank everybody who came tonight and testified, and who stayed and listened to the conversation. And I'm sure that there are people out there who are going, I wish they'd said this, or somebody said that, or that's not true. Please send your additional comments to info@babcnc.org with as many supporting citations and code sections and whatever it might be that you can, because I just want to sort of express how this is something that we're taking very seriously, the comments that have come in. And as you can see in this conversation, are grappling ourselves here with what means what and what the top priorities are and what implications.
I'd like to make one more comment about that, Travis, in addition to what you just said.
So info@babcnc.org will get to us, and I'll make sure that it gets shared with everybody.
Be specific, address a specific issue, and give backup to it. Don't start rambling. Just get the question directly to us, what the question is, or what you're looking for. Okay. And I don't mind, info@babcnc.org. That's fine. I was going to volunteer that, but go ahead. Don has been had his hand up for a long time. Don?
Well, I've been waiting. I appreciate the fact that what I was going to say has been stated, which is, in general, this is a draft ordinance. This is something that comments have been asked for.
Don, can you speak up just a little more?
This is a draft ordinance.
That's fine.
And that's what we've been looking at now for a number of months. The the invitation that Travis made is what I was trying to get to in you too, Bob.
Can't understand.
Which is that to the extent that there have been public comments tonight, we're all looking for specific suggestions for solving problems and to ask for those to come to us in articulate ways so we can help solve the problems that are concerned of everybody. And I think you got an example of something very good tonight, which I hope you appreciated, we all appreciated, which was Jamie's presentation, Sean's analysis, insights from Travis, people who have spent many hours thinking about this stuff, not just being generalized and spooky. So that's what we're looking for. And I'm glad both Bob and Travis articulated better than what I was going to do when I started to speak. But the fact is, that's what's needed for us to progress this thing. And I'm sure we'll all look forward to the next meeting that will try and address some of these things. And all of us as concerned citizens have some responsibility to look at the public sources that are available to us. There are those that are in the other ordinances. There are those that looking at Zymus will get you a look to see where you are in the map and how it relates to the map. And in light of the fact that people have come here to the meeting to address it, it shows some encouragement that there are people out there concerned for the same things that this committee is and would like to participate, and therefore should be encouraged to participate in a possible way, a positive way. And I'm sorry to take it on beyond the 9:30.
No.
Thank you.
I think we were all very pleased with the turnout.
Oh, here's our final action is that we have a little, I guess, ad hoc group here. Myself, Mindy, and Travis are going to take all the comments that were received, the public comments, whatever notes that we've taken, the deliberation of the joint committee, any other comments that we receive at the info address, and we're going to put together a very rough draft letter. And then we're going to present that letter. We're going to talk about that letter at the next joint committee meeting. We'll further refine it. And then ultimately that letter will go to the board for ratification. Okay. And when do we expect this next meeting to occur, just for the public's awareness? It probably won't be until next year, right? Yep. January. Okay.
Yeah,
So
best guess
everyone
would
have a
be
wonderful Christmas.
Early January. But that also gives you time to think about the letter.
Okay, great.
Okay.
All right, good meeting, people.
Shall shall we adjourn?
Yes. Would somebody like to?
I move that we adjourn.
Okay.
I second it.
I'll second.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Not bad. We went a half an hour over what I expected, but was good.